Hello and welcome to Research Stream. Today we're talking about becoming a scientist and how science actually leads you to a career. And we have a guest here, Dr. Jenny Stockwell. Hi, Jenny.
Oh,
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us today. I thought I'd get your perspective really on what being a scientist is like for you and so on. So, can I just ask my first question, which is what's your job title and what is it that you do?
So I'm actually my job title is senior scientist, and I work for a contract research organisation. So that's quite cool because it means that I get to work on lots of different projects, not just the same thing for years and years. And I actually work in drug discovery, which is something I've wanted to do from when I was quite young. And my job sort of comes into two sections really. So I do synthetic organic chemistry, so I'm making things and making new drugs, and then also medicinal chemistry, which is more the sort of design aspect and coming up with new ideas and sort of feeding back the data we get from the biologists, and it's sort of very collaborative between the sciences, which is again what I really wanted to do.
That sounds brilliant. So before this, you did a science degree. I vaguely remember from knowing you at the time. Can you
Yeah.
tell me why you decided to pursue a science degree?
So I actually have always been quite interested in science. So I was probably in my early teens when I first started getting interested in genetics. It was initially, and I was initially wanting to do biology when I first sort of started showing an interest in science, and I wanted really to cure genetic disease was my initial thought, but I ended up going down a slightly different path, but still related, I think.
And
So
so,
that,
how did you then make your decision between biology and chemistry?
well, it was quite funny actually. I was applying to university, and I'd done chemistry as an A level because I was told, if you want to do biology, it's a good idea to have done chemistry A level because a lot of there's a lot of overlap. It's good to have an understanding of both. And then I went to some open days, and I wish originally I was applying for degrees that were kind of chemistry and biology combinations. And one of the universities I went to, they actually said, "Oh, we've closed our chemistry department, so the degree you've applied for now comes into the biology department." And I was like, but what if I want to do chemistry modules? What if I want to do more chemistry modules? Are there going to be any chemistry lecturers still here? How am I going to be able to do any chemistry? And I realized at that point, you know what? I actually like chemistry better than biology. So that sort of made the decision for me. So I ended up going to Warwick actually and studying medicinal chemistry. When only a little bit of biology, I just did an oncology module, which was the only actual biology module I did.
It's funny how like fortuitousness comes about, really, isn't it, in changing our lives?
Yes.
So, in terms of that, then, how do you feel you use science in your role? And I'm going to couple it with the next question, which is: would you say you still apply the scientific method, or not so much?
My work is completely related to what I did for my degree. So my degree was medicinal chemistry, and then my job role is medicinal chemistry organic synthesis, which was exactly what I did for my undergraduate, exactly what I did for my PhD. So it's all been very much tailored towards what I wanted to do in my job role all the way through. So every day I'm doing experiments. I'm in a chemistry lab and I'm doing experiments. I'm making molecules in the chemistry lab, and that that applies an awful lot of science because everything we're doing is we're making things that nobody's ever made before, and that can take multiple steps in order to do. And another thing that we're always having to think about is, chemical synthesis, it's a little bit like building IKEA furniture, in that if you put the things together in the wrong order, you're going to really stitch yourself up later on when you realize that, I haven't put the runners on the drawers yet, and I've already put them in. This isn't going to work. I'm going to have to take them all out and start again. But of course, we don't have an instruction book necessarily that tells us exactly how to put together the molecules. So we have to go by our experience. We have to go by looking on online databases like SciFinder. We have to go through the lab books of our colleagues and see what other people have done, speak to other people about what they've done, using our own experience as well, to think about the best way in which to construct the molecules. So that's the first part. But the second part is everything is a make test um, sort of system. So, we make a molecule, the biologists go away and test it to see whether or not it's got the potential to be a drug. And then they feed back the information to us as chemists. And then we make new things based on the information we've been given. So
That's really
really
cool.
there's quite a lot to it, really.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Can I just ask you about that word experimentation? Sorry, I haven't warned you that I'm going to ask you this, but the word experiment, I think a lot of people think just means like mixing stuff and that's an experiment. But in fact, it's about like seeing if something's new. How do you feel about that word experimentation, and how do you mean that you experiment in your work?
Gosh, I suppose it means a lot of different things, because to me there's so many different types of experiments. There's the very simple experiment where I essentially, it's like cookery. I'm mixing things together to make something, and that's an experiment in itself because it's something that nobody's necessarily done before exactly like that. So it's an experiment as to whether or not it's actually going to work. But also you've got the experiments that we send the final compounds away for, and there's so many different biology experiments that they use in order to establish the different aspects of whether or not something will work as a drug. You have your primary assays, which you're looking very directly, will this have an action on the thing we're targeting? But also there's so many different assays to test whether or not, if you take a tablet of this drug, will it even get out of your stomach or out of your intestines and into your body? And if it does, will it immediately be destroyed by your liver? Will it have any adverse effects on your heart? And so there's all these experiments that get done, and all these different models that are used. And so to me, it's such a broad term, and all of this information gets fed back into our design process. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
brilliant. Thank you for that, Jenny. Sorry, I did throw it at you. But yeah, I think you've really represented there that amazing thing about science, which is it's an experiment where you do another experiment and another experiment, and it leads you eventually to the solution. But also there are hundreds of different routes that didn't work, and that's just the nature of science, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
brilliant.
big part of it is actually we have very high failure rate.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't be right all the time, otherwise it wouldn't be an experiment, would it? Brilliant. So in terms of the skills that you have then, are there any skills that you were developing anyway out of your own interest that suddenly became useful in your science?
Well, I've always been quite sort of creative. I've always sort of had quite a lot of imagination. I've never, unfortunately, I can't draw, I can't sing, I can't really play any musical instruments, but I've always been in my own way quite creative. And I think chemistry is one of the sciences that actually allows you to be quite creative. So we use a lot of structural information when we're designing drugs. So that might be, if you imagine the where you're trying to target when you're designing a drug, if you imagine it as like a keyhole, the sort of different structural information you could gather. So you can either look at different keys that also fit into that keyhole and try and match up the shape of those, or you can sometimes have 3D structural information about what the keyhole itself actually looks like. And then we'll use that information to help with designing new ideas and coming up with new things to test. But also there's a lot of other problems that you need to solve, as I said before, when you're thinking about whether or not the drug's actually going to get into the body or if it's going to be chewed up by the liver. And there's a lot of things that you have to balance in order to actually make a drug. It's not just, does it have an action where it's supposed to, it's, does it even get to the point where it will have an action? And you have to be quite creative because there's lots of different rules that you can follow to try and improve whether or not the compound is likely to work as a drug. But you have to think about how to apply them, because otherwise you're just going to end up with something it's just not very elegant, just doesn't really work very well, and it's such a massive compromise. And you do really have to think outside the box a lot and apply the knowledge that you have in creative ways. So I think that's one way in which It does feed in. And another really sort of twee thing that somebody once said is chemistry is the science that studies itself. It studies what it creates. So you make something new and then you study it, which is very much the same as art, in that you paint something and then people come along and study it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that science is often represented in a very cold and clinical way, and actually, as you say, there are so many paths to follow. It is a creative process to say, well, which one's actually likely to get there. So I really like your choice of creativity there. And how about in the opposite direction? So we talked about life getting into science. How about science getting into life? Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, I suppose like the way I interpret this question was slightly differently. Like, do I apply science in my life? I suppose in that I'm very practical in my life in general. And I do like cooking and baking, which I suppose does have quite a lot of crossover with.
Yeah, there's a T-shirt that says "Science is baking for hungry people." No, cooking is science for hungry people.
Yeah, no, that's entirely true. And it means at least the things that I cook at home I can eat, as opposed to the things that are in the lab, which you probably don't want to eat. But yeah, no, I think that's certainly true. That I think a lot of people, a lot of my friends that are scientists, they are quite practical people, and you do apply a lot of the same sort of logic as you do at work when you're at home. And I don't think you're ever not a scientist.
That's
I think that's one of the really embarrassing things as well.
Sometimes, yes.
Somebody said something, or you hit something said on telly, and you just sat there like, "Oh, that's not quite right, is it?"
There are other times you have to stop yourself and be like, actually.
Actually, no.
Yeah.
Or the embarrassing moment when you're sat in the hairdressers and they're putting foils on your hair, which takes a really long time, and they say, "So why haven't people cured cancer yet?" And I'm just there like, well.
Well, yeah, that's an hour conversation.
Not a simple answer. No. It's going to take a while.
That's brilliant. So, what advice do you think you would give then to someone who's looking to create a scientific career? In any science, really. It's so broad. Do you have any advice?
I mean, I suppose I did mention about failure rate. You do have a very high failure rate in science. It's just one of those things. And if you are beaten up by that, you're never going to make it as a scientist. If you take that really personally, yeah. But you have to appreciate that the amazing thing about doing science is you're constantly pushing back the bubble and increasing the size of the bubble of human understanding, which is really cool. And to be able to say, "Oh, I made something today that literally nobody else has ever made, and I was the first person to ever make it." And it's also really cool to know that, especially in my job, that I could be making something or doing work that one day could actually save somebody's life, or increase the length of their life, or improve the quality of their life, which is actually really, really rewarding. And I think that's something that is nice about doing a career in science, that you can hopefully do something that will benefit people in sort of a very broad sense, which makes all the failure seem slightly less upsetting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you still have to deal with it.
Yeah.
It is hard, but it's worth it.
That's brilliant. I think that's a great message for us to end on. I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time, Jenny, to talk to us. And yeah, it's just really nice to hear that message, especially the one about failure. Failure happens all the time. We just have to pick ourselves up, don't we? Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jenny. And that brings us to the end of our interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much.